Once he commanded boardrooms. Now he begs on the street. But when Jonathan Carter looked up and saw Alicia's hand offering him money, the ex-wife he betrayed, his pride shattered in an instant. Hi friends, if you're ready for the full story, make sure you hit subscribe, and tell me in the comments where in the world you're watching from. Tomorrow, I've got another story that will blow your mind, and trust me, you don't want to miss it. Now let's dive in. The chill of a late autumn morning gnawed at Jonathan Carter's bones as he sat on the cracked steps of an abandoned storefront in downtown Manhattan. Once upon a time, the city bent to his will. Its skyline reflected his ambition. Its deals and mergers carried his name. Now, all it reflected was the dull shine of a paper cup in his trembling hand, its bottom clinking with spare change from strangers who never met his eyes. His suit, once tailored Italian wool, had faded into a shapeless husk, the fabric frayed at the cuffs. A week's worth of untrimmed beard shadowed his face. His hands, which used to sign contracts worth millions, now shook not from power, but from hunger. Yet even in this ruin, fragments of the man he once was remembering. He still sat straight, his jaw clenched as if he were bracing himself against invisible boardroom pressure. Pride, though battered, had not left him completely. It hung on like a ghost, mocking his downfall. Every sound on the street seemed louder to him now. The hiss of bus brakes, the shuffle of hurried footsteps, the rhythmic click of a woman's heels against the pavement. Once, he would have tuned these out, locked in conference calls with billionaires. Now, every detail was a reminder that life moved on without him. He lifted his eyes whenever someone slowed near him, hoping for generosity. Most passed by, avoiding his gaze. Some muttered apologies. A few dropped coins, never lingering. Jonathan hated that most of all, the way they tossed pity at him like scraps to a stray dog. It wasn't supposed to be like this. He had built Carter Global Holdings from the ground up, pouring decades of his life into it. But obsession is a hungry beast. It devoured his sleep, his kindness, his marriage. By the time he realized that Alicia, the woman he once called his queen, had packed her bags and left, he was too consumed by numbers and portfolios to stop her. Even in the divorce, he had been cold, certain she would come crawling back. But life has a cruel way of teaching lessons. The empire collapsed under a series of bad investments. Partners turned against him, the press shredded his reputation, and creditors circled like vultures. His home, his cars, his penthouse gone. And when his prideful refusal to ask for help ran out, he was left here, begging. Across town, another life unfolded in sharp contrast. Alicia Williams adjusted the sleeves of her silk blouse as she stepped out of her car, a gleaming black Mercedes S-Class, into the parking garage of a midtown high-rise. The car door closed with a soft thud, the sound of triumph she had earned with grit and fire. Her reflection in the tinted window made her pause. Tall, poised, with skin glowing like polished bronze and curls styled into a crown, Alicia looked every bit the executive she had fought to become. Yet behind the calm in her eyes lingered shadows of the past, years spent rebuilding her life after Jonathan had dismissed her worth. At first, she had been crushed by the divorce. Nights alone in a one-bedroom apartment, surviving on instant noodles while fighting tears. She remembered clutching rejection letters, wondering if she had wasted her best years on a man who barely saw her. But Alicia was not the kind of woman who stayed broken. She clawed her way back into the world, finishing her degree, building connections, and starting her own consulting firm. Now, that firm was thriving, her client list growing every quarter. She had carved out a life where she no longer needed anyone's validation, especially not Jonathan's. Still, there were mornings when old memories surfaced, his booming laughter in restaurants, the way he once looked at her like she was his entire world before greed took its place. Alicia would shake them away, grounding herself in the truth. She was better without him. She walked through the lobby, exchanging nods with colleagues and security. Her heels echoed against the marble floor, each step a beat in the rhythm of her independence. Upstairs, her office overlooked the very skyline Jonathan once ruled. She sipped her latte, opened her laptop, and began her day, unaware that fate was already arranging a collision she had never expected. Back downtown, Jonathan exhaled as the afternoon sun dipped lower, shadows lengthening across the streets. He leaned against the wall, tired and bitter. His thoughts wandered to Alicia, though he hadn't seen her in years. Did she still think of him? Or had she scrubbed him clean from her memory? Then, the low purr of an engine caught his ear. A luxury car slowed near the curb where he sat. Black, sleek and polished, its tinted window slid down with deliberate grace. Jonathan squinted against the glare, his breath catching in his throat. The face that appeared through the glass was unmistakable. Alicia Williams. Her eyes widened in shock as recognition set in. The woman he once dismissed as insignificant now looked at him from behind the wheel of success. In her hand, folded bills rested between manicured fingers. The hand stretched outward, a silent offering. Jonathan's heart lurched. For the first time since his downfall, he wished he were invisible. Pride and shame battled within him. The woman he had loved betrayed, and lost now looked down at him, not with vengeance but with pity. And pity was more unbearable than hunger. If you were in Jonathan's shoes, once powerful, now powerless, would you accept help from the very person you hurt most? Comment below what your reaction would be. Jonathan froze. The sounds of the city dulled, as though time itself had been cut open. The passing cars blurred, the footsteps faded. Only one thing existed: Alicia's hand, stretched out toward him, Bill's fan between her graceful fingers. Her nails, painted a deep burgundy, glinted against the sunlight. Once, he had teased her about her love for elegant colors, how she always matched polish to outfit, shoes to handbag. Now that same elegance stood as a mirror of what she had become: refined, untouchable, whole. For a moment, Jonathan couldn't breathe. He saw the woman he had abandoned for late-night meetings and endless mergers. He saw the woman who had begged him, with tears in her voice, to come home early, to choose love over numbers. He saw the woman who had walked away when he refused. And now that same woman, seated in a luxury car with leather seats that smelled of victory, was offering him charity. His lips parted, but no words came. His pride roared inside him, "Don't take it. Don't you dare take it." Yet hunger clawed at his ribs, and desperation whispered, "It's only paper. You need it to survive." Alicia's voice broke the silence. "Jonathan." It wasn't loud, it barely rose above the hum of her engine, but it carried weight. The way she said his name, a mix of shock and sadness, felt like a knife in his chest. He looked at her fully then. Her eyes were steady, but behind the calm there was something else: hesitation, pity, maybe even anger softened by years. He shook his head. I don't need your money." The words scraped from his throat like gravel. Her brow arched slightly, her hand still extended. "You're sitting on a street corner with a cup, Jonathan. Don't tell me you don't need it." Her bluntness stung. It was the same no-nonsense tone she had once used when calling him out on his arrogance, the one he had dismissed as nagging. He swallowed hard. "I can't take it," he muttered, lowering his gaze to the ground. "Not from you." Silence pressed between them. The city carried on, horns blaring, footsteps rushing, but inside that bubble of a moment, it was only them, locked in an old battle, his pride against her unyielding compassion. Alicia studied him, her hand still suspended. She had expected to feel satisfaction at seeing him like this, the man who once ruled her life now reduced to nothing. But instead, all she felt was a knot in her chest. He looked smaller somehow, fragile, his sharp edges dulled by ruin. Memories flickered unbidden, dinners where he barely touched his food because he was checking numbers on his phone, arguments cut short by his dismissive hand wave, the night she signed the divorce papers while he didn't bother showing up in court. And yet, here he was, unshaven, trembling, but still holding onto a pride that refused to die. She withdrew her hand slowly, folding the bills back into her palm. "Suit yourself." Jonathan's chest tightened. He should have felt relief, his dignity preserved, but instead, all he felt was emptiness. The distance her retracted hand created was heavier than the money itself. Before she could roll up the window, he blurted out, "Wait." Alicia froze. Her eyes narrowed, but she didn't drive off. "What is it?" Jonathan's jaw clenched. He wanted to ask for forgiveness, to tell her that she had been right all along, that losing her had been the true bankruptcy of his life. But the words lodged in his throat. Years of arrogance had made confession impossible. So instead he whispered, "Why are you even stopping here?" Alicia tilted her head, her lips pressing into a thin line. "Because despite everything, Jonathan, I'm not the kind of person who drives past someone I recognize on the street, especially not you." Her words landed heavy. Not pity. Not love. Just human decency. And somehow, that stung more than anything. Jonathan nodded faintly, shame painting his face. "I don't deserve even that." The silence stretched again. Alicia studied him one last time, her expression unreadable. She wanted to say something sharp, something that would put the final nail in the coffin of his ego. But looking at him, hunched and broken, the words died on her tongue. Instead she whispered, almost to herself, "You used to be so untouchable." Then, with a slow motion, she rolled up her window. The black car eased forward, blending into traffic, leaving Jonathan staring at the empty space where she had been. He pressed a hand against his chest, his heart hammering like a drum. He hated himself for the tears burning at the corners of his eyes. He hated himself for still loving her. His paper cup lay beside him, forgotten. The coins inside clinked faintly as a breeze rattled them, mocking him. For the first time since his downfall, Jonathan Carter admitted to himself, hunger was nothing compared to the ache of regret. Do you believe Alicia should have given Jonathan the money, or was pulling her hand back the right choice? Tell us in the comments, what would you have done? Jonathan froze. The sounds of the city dulled, as though time itself had been cut open. The passing cars blurred, the footsteps faded. Only one thing existed, Alicia's hand, stretched out toward him, Bill's fan between her graceful fingers. Her nails, painted a deep burgundy, glinted against the sunlight. Once, he had teased her about her love for elegant colors, how she always matched polish to outfit, shoes to handbag. Now that same elegance stood as a mirror of what she had become, refined, untouchable, whole. For a moment, Jonathan couldn't breathe. He saw the woman he had abandoned for late-night meetings and endless mergers. He saw the woman who had begged him, with tears in her voice, to come home early, to choose love over numbers. He saw the woman who had walked away when he refused. And now that same woman, seated in a luxury car with leather seats that smelled of victory, was offering him charity. His lips parted, but no words came. His pride roared inside him. Don't take it. Don't you dare take it. Yet hunger clawed at his ribs, and desperation whispered, it's only paper. You need it to survive. Alicia's voice broke the silence. Jonathan. It wasn't loud, it barely rose above the hum of her engine, but it carried weight. The way she said his name, a mix of shock and sadness, felt like a knife in his chest. He looked at her fully then. Her eyes were steady, but behind the calm there was something else, hesitation, pity, maybe even anger softened by years. He shook his head. I don't need your money. The words scraped from his throat like gravel. Her brow arched slightly, her hand still extended. You're sitting on a street corner with a cup, Jonathan. Don't tell me you don't need it. Her bluntness stung. It was the same no-nonsense tone she had once used when calling him out on his arrogance, the one he had dismissed as nagging. He swallowed hard. I can't take it, he muttered, lowering his gaze to the ground. Not from you. Silence pressed between them. The city carried on, horns blaring, footsteps rushing, but inside that bubble of a moment, it was only them, locked in an old battle, his pride against her unyielding compassion. Alicia studied him, her hand still suspended. She had expected to feel satisfaction at seeing him like this, the man who once ruled her life now reduced to nothing. But instead, all she felt was a knot in her chest. He looked smaller somehow, fragile, his sharp edges dulled by ruin. Memories flickered unbidden, dinners where he barely touched his food because he was checking numbers on his phone, arguments cut short by his dismissive hand wave, the night she signed the divorce papers while he didn't bother showing up in court. And yet, here he was, unshaven, trembling, but still holding onto a pride that refused to die. She withdrew her hand slowly, folding the bills back into her palm. Suit yourself. Jonathan's chest tightened. He should have felt relief, his dignity preserved, but instead, all he felt was emptiness. The distance her retracted hand created was heavier than the money itself. Before she could roll up the window, he blurted out, "Wait." Alicia froze. Her eyes narrowed, but she didn't drive off. "What is it?" Jonathan's jaw clenched. He wanted to ask for forgiveness, to tell her that she had been right all along, that losing her had been the true bankruptcy of his life. But the words lodged in his throat. Years of arrogance had made confession impossible. So instead he whispered, "Why are you even stopping here?" Alicia tilted her head, her lips pressing into a thin line. "Because despite everything, Jonathan, I'm not the kind of person who drives past someone I recognize on the street, especially not you." Her words landed heavy. Not pity. Not love. Just human decency. And somehow, that stung more than anything. Jonathan nodded faintly, shame painting his face. "I don't deserve even that." The silence stretched again. Alicia studied him one last time, her expression unreadable. She wanted to say something sharp, something that would put the final nail in the coffin of his ego. But looking at him, hunched and broken, the words died on her tongue. Instead she whispered, almost to herself, "You used to be so untouchable." Then, with a slow motion, she rolled up her window. The black car eased forward, blending into traffic, leaving Jonathan staring at the empty space where she had been. He pressed a hand against his chest, his heart hammering like a drum. He hated himself for the tears burning at the corners of his eyes. He hated himself for still loving her. His paper cup lay beside him, forgotten. The coins inside clinked faintly as a breeze rattled them, mocking him. For the first time since his downfall, Jonathan Carter admitted to himself, hunger was nothing compared to the ache of regret. Do you believe Alicia should have given Jonathan the money, or was pulling her hand back the right choice? Tell us in the comments, what would you have done? It was the kind of night the city tried to forget, rain slashing down in heavy sheets, wind howling between the high-rises, neon lights blurring through the wet glass of storefronts. People hurried along with umbrellas, their coats pulled tight, determined to get indoors. Nobody lingered. Except Jonathan. He sat beneath the awning of a closed diner, his body hunched against the cold. His thin coat clung damp against his skin, offering no protection from the storm. His cough, which had started days ago as a scratch in his throat, now rattled his chest with every breath. He tried to stay awake, tried to keep moving, but his body betrayed him. Shivers racked him as he pulled his knees tighter to his chest. He told himself he'd find shelter soon. But the truth was, he didn't have the strength to move. Across the city, Alicia was wrapping up a late meeting with a client. She gathered her folders, slid them into her leather bag, and sighed at the storm raging outside her office window. Nights like this made her grateful for her success, for the car waiting for her in the garage, for the warm condo she would return to. As she rode the elevator down, her mind wandered, uninvited, back to Jonathan. She had convinced herself she wouldn't think of him again, but the storm stirred something uneasy inside her. The thought of him out there, on the streets in this weather, made her stomach twist. "Not your problem," she whispered under her breath as the elevator doors slid open. "Not anymore." But fate had other plans. Her driver eased the Mercedes out of the garage, tires hissing against the wet pavement. Alicia leaned back, scrolling through emails on her phone, trying to distract herself. Then, as they rounded a corner downtown, her eyes caught a familiar figure huddled beneath a diner awning. Her breath caught in her throat. "Stop the car," she said sharply. The driver slowed. "Here, ma'am. It's pouring." "Yes. Stop." The car pulled over. Alicia lowered the window, rain pelting her face as she leaned out for a better look. It was him. Jonathan Carter. His head drooped, chin resting against his chest, his hair plastered wet against his forehead. The proud posture he had once carried was gone. He looked small, fragile, almost childlike in his vulnerability. Alicia's heart wavered. She should keep driving. She should remind herself of the years of neglect, the arguments, the way he had once chosen his portfolio over her heart. But instead, her voice came out firm, commanding. "Jonathan." He stirred weakly, blinking up through the rain. When his eyes met hers, they were clouded, unfocused. He coughed, the sound hollow and rough. "Alicia." His voice cracked. Something inside her broke. She opened the door, rain drenching her silk blouse instantly. "Come on," she said, grabbing his arm. "You'll die out here." He resisted, pulling back with what little strength he had. "I'm fine," he croaked. "You're not fine." She tightened her grip, anger and concern mixing in her tone. "You're sick. Stop being stubborn for once." The familiarity of the moment struck them both. It felt like every argument they'd ever had, compressed into this instant, him resisting, her insisting. Jonathan's knees buckled, and Alicia caught him just in time, her shoulder pressed against his chest as she tried to steady him. He was thinner than she remembered, his body trembling like a leaf in the wind. Her driver hurried around to help, and together they guided Jonathan into the car. He collapsed into the leather seat, coughing violently. The warmth of the vehicle enveloped him, a stark contrast to the icy storm outside. Alicia sat beside him, her clothes soaked through, but she didn't care. She studied him in the dim glow of the dashboard lights. His eyes were closed, his breathing shallow, his pride stripped raw. For a long moment, she said nothing. Neither did he. The silence was heavy, filled with everything unspoken between them. Finally, she spoke. "You need a doctor." He shook his head weakly. "Can't afford one." Her jaw clenched. "Then you'll stay at the shelter tonight. At least get warm, eat something." Jonathan let out a bitter laugh, coughing midway. "Shelter? That's what I've become, huh? A man who once had a penthouse now needs a cot and soup." Alicia turned to him, her eyes sharp. "You think this is about pride? Jonathan, you're sick. You need help. For once in your life, can you stop caring about your ego and let someone care about you?" Her words pierced through the fog in his mind. He opened his eyes slowly, looking at her, the same fire in her gaze that had once captivated him, the fire he had extinguished too many times with neglect. He whispered, barely audible, "Why are you doing this?" The question lingered in the air. Alicia hesitated, her throat tightening. She could have said she was doing it out of pity. She could have said it was simple decency. But the truth was messier, heavier. "Because I can't just watch you waste away," she said softly. "Not you." The driver steered the car toward a shelter Alicia knew downtown, one she had donated to in the past. By the time they arrived, Jonathan was nearly asleep, his body limp with exhaustion. Alicia guided him inside, the staff recognizing her immediately. Ms. Williams, one of the coordinators, greeted warmly. "You're back." "Yes," Alicia said quickly. "This man needs a bed. And some medical attention if you can manage." They nodded, ushering Jonathan inside. He stumbled, leaning against her one last time before they helped him down the hall. As Alicia stood in the doorway, rain dripping from her hair, she felt an ache she hadn't expected. She should have felt relief handing him over. Instead, she felt tethered, as though leaving meant abandoning him all over again. Jonathan glanced back once, his eyes meeting hers. For the first time in years, gratitude shone in his expression, not pride, not arrogance, just raw, quiet thanks. And for Alicia, that look was more disarming than any riches he had ever flaunted. Jonathan awoke to the faint hum of voices and the sterile smell of disinfectant. For a moment, confusion clouded his mind. The last thing he remembered was the storm, the warmth of the car, Alicia's firm grip on his arm. Now he lay on a narrow cot in a shelter infirmary, a thin blanket draped over him. A small lamp flickered on the bedside table, casting a yellow glow. His chest still ached when he coughed, but at least the shivers had subsided. Someone had given him medicine. He turned his head and froze. Alicia sat in a chair across from him, her posture straight, her arms folded, her expression unreadable. She had changed into a dry blazer and slacks, but her hair still carried traces of rain. She looked tired, but composed, like she had spent hours watching him. "You stayed," he rasped, his voice rough. She shrugged lightly. "You were burning with fever when we brought you in. I wasn't about to just drop you off and walk away." Jonathan swallowed, his pride pricking him even in gratitude. "You didn't have to." Her eyes hardened slightly. "Maybe not. But I did." Silence settled between them, broken only by the muffled sounds of other shelter residents shuffling in the hallway. Jonathan's gaze drifted down to his hands, thin and trembling against the blanket. Once, those hands had held her, promised her security. Now they could barely lift a paper cup. Finally, Alicia spoke again, her voice quieter this time. "How did it get this bad, Jonathan?" He let out a bitter laugh, though it quickly dissolved into a cough. "You mean, how did the mighty Carter Empire crumble?" "I mean you," she corrected sharply. "Not the empire. You." He sighed, leaning back against the pillow. "I thought, if I built it big enough, strong enough, we'd never have to worry again. I told myself it was for us. For you." Her jaw tightened. "For us? Don't rewrite history. You didn't build that empire for us, Jonathan. You built it for yourself. For your ego." Her words sliced through the air. He flinched, but didn't argue. She was right. "You remember," she continued, her voice rising with years of pent-up pain, "how many dinners I ate alone in that penthouse? How many nights I waited, hoping you'd come home before midnight? How many times I begged you to just talk to me, just see me?" Jonathan closed his eyes. Memories assaulted him. Alicia standing in the kitchen with untouched plates, her voice trembling as she said, "We don't even talk anymore." He had brushed past her then, muttering something about important deals. "Yes," he whispered hoarsely. "I remember." Her eyes glistened, though she blinked the tears back. "You weren't just absent, Jonathan. You made me feel invisible. Like I was competing with your portfolio for your love. And when I left, you didn't even fight for me. Do you know what that did to me?" He opened his eyes, meeting hers. For once, there was no defense, no corporate charm. Just regret. "It destroyed you." "It nearly did," she said, her voice breaking for the first time. "But I rebuilt myself. Alone. While you kept chasing numbers until they ate you alive." The words hung heavy between them. Jonathan's chest tightened, not just from illness, but from the weight of truth. "I was a fool," he admitted, his voice cracking. "I thought money was love. I thought giving you the world meant giving you things. But I never gave you me." Alicia inhaled deeply, trying to steady herself. "And that's all I ever wanted. You. Not the penthouse. Not the jewelry. Just you." Her confession struck him harder than any bankruptcy notice ever had. Silence stretched again, thick and suffocating. Jonathan turned his head, staring at the cracked ceiling. His voice was barely audible when he said, "When you walked away, I told myself you'd regret it. That you'd realize you needed me. But the truth is, I was the one who needed you. And I didn't realize it until it was too late." Alicia studied him carefully. The arrogance that had once defined him was gone. In its place was a man stripped bare, humbled, broken. She wanted to believe his words, but years of disappointment cautioned her heart. "Do you even know how many times I cried myself to sleep?" she asked softly. "Do you know how many times I asked God why I wasn't enough for you?" Jonathan's throat tightened. "You were always enough. I just wasn't man enough to see it." A tear finally escaped her eye. She brushed it away quickly, as if embarrassed to let him see. They sat in that fragile space for a long time, the past finally spoken aloud instead of buried under silence. Eventually, Alicia stood, smoothing her blazer. "You need rest. The medicine will help." He watched her, panic flickering in his chest at the thought of her leaving. "Will you come back?" She hesitated, her hand on the doorknob. She should have said no. She should have walked out and never looked back. But something in his voice, the vulnerability, the sincerity, pulled at her. "I don't know," she said honestly. "We'll see." And then she was gone. Jonathan lay back, staring at the ceiling, tears sliding silently into his hair. For the first time in years, he allowed himself to feel the full weight of what he had lost. Not just wealth, not just reputation, but Alicia. He whispered into the darkness, "God, please, don't let this be the end." The next day, Alicia returned. She told herself it was just to check if he was alive, to ease her conscience. But when she walked into the shelter infirmary and saw him sitting up, sipping broth gratefully, something inside her softened despite her resistance. Their eyes met. Neither spoke at first. But in that silence, so much was said: regret, pain, longing, and maybe the faintest spark of hope. The storm had passed. By the time Jonathan woke again, sunlight spilled weakly through the shelter's narrow windows, turning the pale. The days at the shelter blurred into a fragile rhythm. Jonathan was recovering, his fever breaking, his cough easing with every passing night. Alicia visited often, though she never admitted to herself why. At first, she told the staff she was simply checking in. But her visits grew longer, slipping from polite concern into something far more personal. Sometimes she brought soup from her favorite cafe. Other times she arrived with a small bag of clean clothes. They would sit in the common room, where the hum of conversation softened into background noise, and talk. Talk, that was something they had lost long before the divorce papers. And now, strangely, here in this stripped-down place, it returned. Jonathan confessed small things he never would have in his CEO days. How much he hated sleeping alone, how the taste of instant coffee reminded him of late nights at the office, how terrified he was when he first realized his money was gone. Alicia, in turn, let him glimpse pieces of her new life. Her firm, her condo, the piece she had clawed out of the wreckage he left behind. For the first time in years, they laughed together. And for a fleeting moment, it almost felt like healing. But fragile bonds are easy to break. It began on a Wednesday evening. Alicia arrived at the shelter after a long day, her heels clicking against the worn linoleum floor. She found Jonathan in the common room, bent over a chessboard with one of the other residents. His face lit up when he saw her, and something in her chest fluttered against her will. "You're late," he teased, moving a pawn. She smirked. "Some of us still have jobs to keep." The banter was light, easy. She settled into a chair across from him, watching him play, and for a moment it felt like the years between them had evaporated. But then she saw it, the way one of the volunteers, a young woman with kind eyes and a soft laugh, touched Jonathan's arm as she explained a move. It was innocent, nothing more than a gesture of friendliness. Still, Alicia felt a sharp twist inside. Jealousy. She told herself it was ridiculous. She had moved on. She had rebuilt. She didn't care who Jonathan talked to. But the knot in her stomach refused to loosen. Later that night, as she and Jonathan sat together over cups of weak coffee, the tension she carried slipped into her voice. "You seem to be making friends," she said casually, though her tone was edged. Jonathan frowned, tilting his head. "What's that supposed to mean?" "Nothing," she said quickly. Too quickly. His eyes narrowed. "No, say it. You've got that look." Alicia's composure cracked. Maybe you're enjoying all this a little too much. The attention. The sympathy." Jonathan's face hardened, his pride flaring instantly. "Excuse me." "You heard me," she pressed, the words spilling before she could stop them. You've always loved being the center of it all. First in boardrooms, now in shelters. Always someone catering to you, feeling sorry for you. Do you even want to get back on your feet, Jonathan? Or are you just what? His voice cut sharp, louder now. Heads turned. Say it, Alicia. Don't dance around it like you always do. Her chest heaved, anger and pain twisting together. Or are you just comfortable being a victim? The room went silent. The words hung between them like a blade. Jonathan's jaw clenched, his hands trembling against the table. For a long moment, he said nothing. Then, his voice low and trembling with fury, he whispered, I have lost everything. Everything. Do you have any idea what that feels like? To go from everything to nothing. Her eyes glistened. Yes, Jonathan. I do. I lost you. And it broke me long before your bank account did. The silence was deafening. He recoiled, her words striking deeper than any insult. The next day, Jonathan avoided her. When she came by, he claimed he was tired. When she pressed, he snapped that he didn't need her charity. Alicia left with her heart pounding, fury and sorrow tangled in her chest. Why had she come back into his life? Why had she allowed herself to hope? But the true breaking point came 2 nights later. Jonathan had finally been deemed well enough to leave the infirmary. The shelter coordinator had arranged a small part-time job for him, stocking supplies in the evenings. It wasn't much, but it was something. Alicia, proud despite their fight, decided to surprise him with a warm dinner. She picked up food from a restaurant they once loved, the place where he had proposed years ago. Maybe, she thought, it could be a gesture of peace. But when she walked into the shelter that night, balancing the bag in her hands, she froze. Jonathan was there in the hallway, leaning against the wall. And that same young volunteer, the one with the kind eyes, was laughing softly beside him. He wasn't touching her, not really, but the closeness, the ease in his smile, made Alicia's stomach drop. Memories of being invisible came rushing back. Nights spent waiting for him. The way he had always had time for everyone else but never for her. She turned and left before he even noticed her. When Jonathan found her the next morning, she was waiting in the lobby, her arms crossed, her expression cold. You moved on fast, she said flatly. He blinked, confused. What are you talking about? That girl, she snapped. The volunteer. I saw you. Smiling, laughing. Like you used to with me, back when I mattered. His face paled, then flushed with anger. Alicia, it wasn't like that. She was helping me with the job. That's it. Her voice trembled. Don't lie to me. I know what I saw. Jonathan's pride, already fragile, shattered under the weight of her accusation. You think I'd replace you that easily? After everything? You really think so little of me. Tears stung her eyes, but she refused to let them fall. I think you've always needed someone to make you feel like a man. And if it's not me, then it'll be someone else. That's who you are, Jonathan. The words struck like daggers. His chest heaved with rage and pain. And you, he spat, you've always needed me to fail, haven't you? So you can feel righteous. Strong. Better than me. Admit it, Alicia. You don't want me to get back up. You want me on my knees. Her breath caught. The wound in his words was too deep. For a moment, neither moved. Then Alicia turned sharply, her heels echoing against the linoleum as she stormed out. Jonathan watched her go, his body shaking, his throat raw with unshed tears. He wanted to chase her, to take back the words, but his pride chained him in place. And so, just like years ago, silence became their battlefield. That night, Jonathan lay awake in his cot, staring at the ceiling. The laughter he had shared with Alicia, the fragile peace they had built, felt like a cruel dream now. All that remained was the echo of harsh words, and the unbearable fear that this time, she was truly gone. And for Alicia, sitting alone in her luxury condo with untouched dinner on the counter, the ache was just as sharp. She hated him for his pride. She hated herself for still loving him. They were both alone again. Broken again. And the bond that had just begun to heal lay shattered. The city outside seemed unusually still, as if even the traffic sensed the fallout between Jonathan and Alicia. The storm had passed days ago, but inside both of them, tempests raged on. Jonathan sat in the shelter's courtyard, his elbows on his knees, his hands clasped so tightly his knuckles whitened. The autumn air was crisp, but he barely felt it. All he felt was the hollow ache inside, the ache of words he wished he could pull back, the sting of pride that had once again driven Alicia away. He replayed their fight over and over, each line of dialogue stabbing at him like shards of broken glass. "You want me on my knees." God, what had possessed him to say that? He didn't believe it. Not really. But anger had a way of dragging out the ugliest lies we tell ourselves. And yet, beneath the anger, the truth gnawed at him. Maybe she was right to think so little of him. He had failed her before, spectacularly. Why wouldn't she expect him to fail again? For the first time in his life, Jonathan felt the full weight of loneliness, not the kind you fill with late nights at the office or expensive whiskey in a penthouse, but the kind that settles into your bones, whispering that you may never be worthy of love again. Meanwhile, across town, Alicia sat in her sleek condo, the city light spilling in through tall windows. The dinner she had once carried home for Jonathan still sat in the fridge, untouched. Every time she opened the door, the sight of it pierced her like a reminder of foolish hope. She sipped red wine from a crystal glass, though the taste was bitter tonight. Her mind circled the same loop of questions. Why had she gone back? Why had she opened herself to him again? And why, even after everything, did her heart still ache for him? She told herself she had been right to walk away again. She told herself Jonathan hadn't changed, that the pride, the selfishness, the blindness were still there. But the tears rolling silently down her cheeks betrayed her. Because she also remembered the way he looked at her in those quiet moments, not with arrogance, but with regret, with longing, with something dangerously close to love. The next evening, Jonathan found himself at the edge of the city, standing outside the office building that bore Alicia's name on a gleaming brass plaque, Williams and Associates. He shouldn't be here. He knew that. He had no appointment, no business, no right. Yet his feet had carried him anyway, driven by a restless ache in his chest. Through the glass doors, he saw her silhouette, elegant, composed, seated at her desk with a stack of papers. She looked powerful, untouchable. A world apart from him. He almost turned away. Pride screamed at him to leave before she saw him, before he humiliated himself further. But something else, quieter, deeper, rooted him to the spot. And then she looked up. Their eyes met through the glass. For a long heartbeat, neither moved. Jonathan swallowed hard, lifted a trembling hand in a half-wave, and then turned to go. But the sound of the door unlocking stopped him. "Jonathan," Alicia's voice called softly. He froze. Slowly, he turned back. She stood in the doorway, her expression unreadable, her posture both guarded and open. "What are you doing here?" she asked. He struggled for words, his throat dry. I needed to see you. Just once more." Her brows drew together. "Why?" Jonathan took a shaky breath. "Because if I don't say this now, I'll regret it for the rest of my life." They sat in her office, the city lights sprawling behind them like a canvas of possibility. The silence between them was thick, filled with everything unsaid. Finally, Jonathan spoke, his voice low and unsteady. "I was wrong. About everything. About money, about pride, about what it means to love someone. I hurt you, Alicia. I failed you. And when you left, I let you go because I was too proud to beg you to stay. That was the worst mistake of my life." Alicia's eyes glistened, but her face remained composed. "And now," he said, his voice breaking, "I don't care if I look weak. I don't care if I have nothing. If I have to beg in the street for scraps the rest of my life, fine. But I can't go another day without telling you, you were the only thing that ever mattered. And I was too blind to see it until I lost you." The rawness in his voice cut through her defenses. Still, she folded her arms, holding onto her composure. "Jonathan, you can't just say these things because you're broken now. How do I know you mean it? How do I know it's not just guilt or loneliness?" He leaned forward, desperation in his eyes. "Because for the first time in my life, I have nothing left to hide behind. No penthouse. No empire. Just me. And if that's not enough, then I'll walk away. But I need you to know the truth before I do." Alicia's heart pounded. The man before her was not the Jonathan she had once married, polished, untouchable, proud. This Jonathan was stripped bare, trembling, raw. And for the first time, she almost believed him. Almost. She looked away, her voice breaking. "You don't understand how deep the wounds go. You don't understand what it took for me to survive after you." "I do," he whispered. "Because I've been surviving without you too. And it's killing me." Her breath caught. Silence fell again. The city hummed outside, oblivious to the two souls locked in a battle far older than their divorce. Finally, Alicia rose from her chair, crossing to the window. She stared out at the skyline, her arms wrapped around herself. Jonathan remained seated, afraid to move, afraid to shatter the fragile air between them. Then she spoke, her voice almost a whisper. "I don't know if I can forgive you, Jonathan. I don't know if I can risk being broken by you again." He stood slowly, his chest tight, his voice trembling. "I'm not asking for forgiveness. I'm asking for a chance. Just one. To show you I can be the man you always deserved." She turned, her eyes shimmering with unshed tears. "And what if you fail again?" He swallowed hard, stepping closer. "Then I'll fail trying to love you right. And that's better than living another day pretending I don't need you." A tear slipped down her cheek. This time, she didn't wipe it away. The room felt charged, heavy with the weight of choice. Alicia's heart battled itself, one side screaming to run, the other whispering to stay. Pride urged her to protect herself, to keep her walls high. But vulnerability, dangerous and intoxicating, tugged her toward him. At last she whispered, "Jonathan, if I let you back in even a little, you can't hurt me again. I won't survive it twice." He closed the distance between them, his voice breaking as he said, "Then I'll spend every day proving I never will." The words hung in the air, trembling, fragile. Neither moved, neither breathed, as the choice lingered between them like the edge of a cliff. And then Alicia did something she hadn't done in years. She let herself hope. The city glowed beneath a blanket of night. Skyscraper lights flickered like constellations against the dark, and the streets pulsed with their usual hum. Yet, inside Alicia's office, time seemed suspended. She stood by the window, Jonathan only a few steps behind her, both locked in the silence that comes before a decision that could change everything. Jonathan's heart pounded like a war drum in his chest. He had laid himself bare, no pride, no wealth, nothing left to shield him. Just truth. Just longing. Just the hope that Alicia might believe in him one last time. Alicia's reflection stared back at her from the glass, eyes glistening, shoulders trembling with the weight of years. Behind her, Jonathan waited, his presence fragile, like a candle flame flickering against the wind. Finally, she turned. "Jonathan," she said softly, her voice almost breaking. "I don't know how to do this. I don't know how to open the door without fearing you'll shut it again." His throat tightened. "Then don't open it all at once. Just a crack. Just enough for me to prove I'll never close it on you again." Her lips trembled. She wanted to resist, to retreat, to rebuild the armor she had spent years perfecting. But something in his eyes, stripped of arrogance, heavy with regret, broke through. Slowly, Alicia stepped closer. She lifted her hand, trembling slightly, and extended it toward him. Jonathan froze. His breath caught, his chest aching with the weight of déjà vu. He had seen this hand before, once on a rainy street, when she lowered her car window and offered him money. Back then, her hand had been an act of pity, a gesture of mercy to a man she thought was lost. But tonight, the hand meant something different. Not pity. Not charity. A choice. An invitation. With tears stinging his eyes, Jonathan reached out and clasped her hand. Their fingers locked, not in desperation this time, but in something steadier. Something like faith. Alicia's voice wavered. "Don't let go again." His grip tightened. "Never." And for the first time in years, they both allowed themselves to breathe. The days that followed were tender, awkward, imperfect, but real. Jonathan left the shelter and began working at the small job the coordinator had arranged. It wasn't glamorous. Stocking shelves, sweeping floors, earning barely enough to buy coffee. But for the first time, he didn't measure his worth by dollar signs. Every shift was a chance to prove to himself, and to Alicia, that he was rebuilding from the ground up. Alicia, meanwhile, struggled with her own doubts. Friends questioned her decision to let Jonathan back into her life. "He'll hurt you again," they warned. "People don't change." But Alicia saw the difference. She saw it in the way Jonathan's eyes no longer drifted past her when she spoke. She saw it in his humility, in his willingness to take small steps without complaint. She saw it in the way he now showed up for her, consistently, quietly, without excuses. One evening, he surprised her by showing up at her office with takeout, simple burgers and fries. Nothing extravagant. Nothing like the candlelit dinners of their past. But when he set the greasy bag on her desk with a grin, she laughed, a laugh so genuine it startled her. "This is your idea of spoiling me now," she teased. Jonathan smirked, shrugging. "I'm a man of simple means these days. But the fries are hot, and I hear the company's decent." She rolled her eyes, but her smile lingered. For the first time in years, dinner together didn't feel like an obligation or a performance. It felt like love. Still, the road wasn't smooth. There were nights Jonathan lay awake, haunted by the ghosts of his failures, terrified he would slip again. There were days Alicia caught herself pulling back, afraid of trusting too much. But instead of burying those fears, they talked. They argued sometimes, voices sharp, but instead of retreating into silence, they kept returning to the table. That was the difference now, they didn't walk away. One night, sitting together on Alicia's balcony overlooking the city, Jonathan finally asked the question that had been burning in him since the night she extended her hand. "Why me, Alicia? After everything, why give me another chance?" She turned to him, her eyes soft, her voice steady. "Because I saw something in you that night. Not the CEO, not the beggar. Just a man who finally realized what mattered. And for the first time, I believed you wouldn't waste it." Jonathan's chest tightened. "I don't deserve you." She shook her head gently. "No one ever deserves love, Jonathan. We just choose it. And I'm choosing us." His throat ached with emotion. For a long moment, he couldn't speak. He simply took her hand again, holding it to his chest, silently promising himself never to let her down again. Months passed. Jonathan found steadier work, then a better one. Slowly, piece by piece, he rebuilt, not to chase status or wealth, but to stand as a man worthy of Alicia's trust. He attended counseling at the shelter, learning to confront the pride that had destroyed him. And through it all, Alicia was there, not to rescue him, but to walk beside him. Their relationship wasn't marked by grand gestures this time. No diamond necklaces, no lavish vacations. Instead, it was built in the quiet moments, sharing coffee before work, reading side by side in the evenings, laughing over small things that once would have been ignored. And in those quiet moments, they discovered something they had missed the first time around. Love wasn't about wealth or status. Love was about presence. About choosing each other, day after day. 1 year later, on a crisp autumn evening, Jonathan led Alicia back to the diner where he had once sat shivering in the rain. The neon sign flickered overhead, the same hum of the city surrounding them. But tonight was different. Tonight, Jonathan stood tall, his hand warm in hers, his eyes clear. He guided her beneath the awning, the place where she had once found him at his lowest. "Do you remember?" he asked softly. Her eyes shimmered. "I'll never forget." He took a deep breath, then dropped to one knee, not in the mud and rain this time, but on solid ground. Alicia gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. Jonathan's voice trembled, but his eyes never left hers. "The first time I had everything, and I lost you. This time, I have nothing but myself. And I'm asking, will you choose me anyway?" Tears streamed down Alicia's face. She knelt too, cupping his face in her hands. "I already have," she whispered. And under the same awning where once she had reached down with pity, now she reached forward with love. Their lips met, sealing not just a reconciliation, but a rebirth. Life has a way of humbling us, stripping away everything we thought mattered, until only truth remains. Jonathan and Alicia's story reminds us that sometimes love isn't about grand beginnings, it's about second chances. Would you have reached out your hand if you were Alicia? Or taken it, if you were Jonathan? Let us know in the comments. And don't forget, subscribe, because more stories like this are waiting to remind you of the power of love. He guided her beneath the awning, the place where she had once found him at his lowest. "Do you remember?" he asked softly. Her eyes shimmered. "I'll never forget." He took a deep breath, then dropped to one knee, not in the mud and rain this time, but on solid ground. Alicia gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. Jonathan's voice trembled, but his eyes never left hers. The first time I had everything, and I lost you. This time, I have nothing but myself. And I'm asking, will you choose me anyway? Tears streamed down Alicia's face. She knelt too, cupping his face in her hands. I already have, she whispered. And under the same awning where once she had reached down with pity, now she reached forward with love. Their lips met, sealing not just a reconciliation, but a rebirth. Life has a way of humbling us, stripping away everything we thought mattered, until only truth remains. Jonathan and Alicia's story reminds us that sometimes love isn't about grand beginnings, it's about second chances. Would you have reached out your hand if you were Alicia? Or taken it, if you were Jonathan? Let us know in the comments. And don't forget, subscribe, because more stories like this are waiting to remind you of the power of love.